I was 47 when I took Danny in, a skinny kid with grease under his nails and more pride than sense. I was 61 when he called me obsolete in front of my own crew. He stood there in a crisp polo and brand new work boots, hands clean as a pastor's, barking at men who'd bled on my concrete for 20 years. "We're done doing things your way, Walt," he said, chin tilted up. "Clients want modern, paperless, faster. You can retire or you can watch how a real company runs." The crew went quiet. You could hear the high whine of the angle grinder in Bay 2 taper off and the pop of the soda machine in the office. I looked at him the way you look at a thunderhead. "Whose company?" I asked. He smiled small. "Mine." It took him a second to realize what he'd admitted. He glanced at the men and doubled down. "I'm buying you out." Signed an intent with the bank. We closed next month. I could taste fresh-cut pine from the pallets, oil, and the stubborn old heat of August hanging in the cavernous shop. I'd taught him to read layout from a hang of light. Taught him you could hear a bearing's death before it screamed. Taught him that money is a loud student and a quiet teacher. "You came to me for a job, Danny," I said. "You leave with a company, do you?" He swallowed. Somewhere a forklift beeped, reversing. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I wiped my hands on a rag, slow. "Son, you have no idea how hard I can make a thing." He didn't flinch. That was new. The boy I'd hired would have stammered. The man in front of me had a lone officer behind him and a woman in his ear. Laura, the one with the razor smile who called my place a legacy brand, like that was a disease. She'd done the logo on his polo. She'd done something to his backbone, too. "Close at the end of the month," he said again, louder for the crew. "New name, new contracts." "Everyone who wants a future stays with me." He waited for my explosion. I gave him a nod that looked like nothing. "Then you better hope your future is kind." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pot of coffee that had no sweetness left in it. 27 years in business leaves you with receipts no one else knows how to read. I spread them like maps, vendors, leases. The line of credit no one had touched in 4 years. The land under the shop with its stubborn little clause. First right of refusal to buy the adjacent lot. Recorded back when the old mill still cast a shadow. An engineer's report on the retaining wall the city inspector kept promising to reclassify. Insurance, contracts, promises I'd made and ones I'd never sign. People think revenge is a scream. It isn't. It's a thermostat. You set it to cold, and you wait till the room is yours. I called Ruby at 6:05 a.m. She'd been my bookkeeper since my first invoice was a handwritten carbon copy. "He did it," she said, no hello. "He stood out there looking like a catalog man and did it." "He did," I said. "Pull me everything with his name on it. W-2S, expense reports, vendor emails he sent on our letterhead. Looking for theft? Looking for pattern." She sighed, soft. "I'll make eggs." "You show up." I went to the shop instead. Habit. I swept. I signed 2 delivery slips. I checked the edge of a blade because my hands don't know they're old. At 9, a courier dropped a thick envelope on my office desk. It was from the bank. "Letter of intent," the cover page said in a cheerful font, as if betrayal should wear a grin. Purchase price, insulting. Earnest money, loaned to him by the same bank. Conditions, list as long as greed. What made me laugh was the schedule of assets. Whoever wrote it had done homework, but not enough. They listed machines we'd sold in the last downturn and missed the patents that actually kept us busy. They called out the land at an old assessed value like dirt can't appreciate while you're not looking. They ignored the clauses in my vendor contracts that tied pricing to me personally. It was a scavenger hunt with half the clues torn off. I initialed where my lawyer Jan told me to initial. I did not sign away what mattered. I smiled at the timing. 30 days. 30 is a lucky number if you understand debt. When Danny left that afternoon, back seat full of design boards and a laptop I'd bought him 2 years ago, I watched his taillights until they were small. He didn't look back. Abandonment is always easier if you don't make eye contact. On my way home, I stopped at the credit union, the small one that still had a jar of lollipops by the teller line. I asked for Hannah, the manager, who'd brought me cookies when Martha died and cut my interest rate when the machines sat idle during COVID. "Coffee?" she asked, then saw my face and put it away. "What do you need, Walt?" "I need quiet." She led me to the conference room that smelled like carpet cleaner and paper. I spread out the LOI and pointed to the bank's name, not hers. The big one across town with the glass atrium you can see from the freeway. They're going to lend a boy I trained the money to buy my company. They'll use my receivables as collateral. They'll call it progress. Hannah looked at me the way a nurse looks when you say the pain is back. "What do you want me to do?" "Tell me who holds their floor plan." "We don't share that. You know that." "I know you can't tell me," I said. "I also know that when I refinanced the warehouse 5 years ago through your sister branch, a different institution took the participating note on the equipment. They syndicate everything. Who carries their paper?" She folded her hands. "Even if I knew I couldn't—" "Sure," I said, and pushed an envelope across the table. It had copies of the credit union's note on my land, every on-time payment, the way I'd never taken a holiday skip even when the world shut its doors, and a draft of a new note in an amount that would make her quarterly numbers sing. "I'm not asking you to give me names. I'm asking you to take a secured position against my adjacent lot and move fast. Then, as a matter of routine, your back office will notify participating lenders on your network. People talk." Hannah stared at the draft. "You're buying the lot?" "I'm buying the lot and the air above it. And I'm buying time." By the time I left, I had an appraisal appointment set for Tuesday, a credit committee meeting for Friday, and a rumor that the big bank's commercial portfolio was overweight in construction services after 2 write-offs in neighboring counties. On Wednesday, I drove to county records. They still have pencils on strings there and a clerk who says "honey" to men my age. I pulled everything that touched my parcel, easements, access, the old Mills legacy contracts. People forget that land remembers. When the mill went under in 1998, it left behind a spiderweb of rights and obligations. Buried in that web was a clause granting the owner of my parcel the right to approve any change of use on the adjacent lot because of a shared drainage swale, and the right to place reasonable restrictions related to industrial noise. Reasonable was a word I knew how to stretch until it covered what I needed covered. Thursday I brought donuts to the city planning office. The kid at the counter beard like a rainstorm, showed me the new GIS overlay and the proposed redevelopment plan the out-of-state developer had floated for our block. "Mixed use," he said, sliding me a printout. "Live work lofts. They want to turn your bay into artisanal retail." I made a sound that wasn't a laugh and wasn't a curse. The developer's name was on the docket for the fall. They'd need variance approvals. They'd need a parking waiver. They'd need the night noise ordinance tweaked. They'd need goodwill, and I had spent 2 decades buying small, boring goodwill, donating the steel for the park gazebo, offering the high school kids' shop class a tour, producing the custom brackets that kept the library's old staircase from sagging into a lawsuit. Friday was for January. She is 5'3" of iron filings and law. I gave her the LOI, the easements, the whispers, the plan. "This is messy," she said, eyes flicking across pages. "Life is messy," I said. "Find me the clean." She found it in the employment agreement Danny had signed at 19 when he was just a mouth and 2 hands and a hunger, an IP assignment that conjured little attention then, but everything now. Every fixture design, every jig, every CAD file created on my equipment was company property. He'd taken copies when he left. That would matter later. "Also," Jan said, tapping a clause I'd forgotten we'd added in 2011 after a different apprentice sold shop drawings to a competitor, "restrictive covenants, narrow, enforceable, 6 months, within 50 miles, specific to spiral stair manufacturing and proprietary fasteners." "Think it scares him?" She smiled like a fox. "It scares his lender." On Saturday, I attended a ribbon cutting at the new community center with a check I could afford and a speech I didn't make. Danny and Lara were there too, shaking hands and claiming future. She wore a black dress that said CFO without ever having earned the F. He wore that polo again. I shook their hands and told them to enjoy the summer. Sunday, I rested. I cleaned Martha's stone. I told her about Danny. I told her about the way he'd stopped calling me Walt and started calling me Walter in emails like we were strangers. I told her about the night noise and the drainage swale and how stupid bravery looks like marching and smart bravery looks like waiting. The afternoon the sky split open and poured. I stood in that downpour until the past slid off me like mud. Monday morning, the big bank called, not to talk to me, of course, but to talk to Ruby. "We need receivable aging," the voice said. "We need vendor concentration. We need copies of your key contracts." Ruby put them on hold and looked at me through the glass of her office. She pointed to the phone, eyebrows up. I nodded. She sent them the receivables. She sent them the vendor list. She did not send them the addenda we'd negotiated one by one with the kind of suppliers who will take a bullet for you if you pay net 15 when everyone else pays net 60. Those addendas say pricing in effect only for purchases made by Walter D. Langford or his designee. She left that part off, not falsifying, just not volunteering the shape of the spear. By Wednesday, I'd heard from a man named Kyle at the bank, a loan officer who spoke like he read bullet points while brushing his teeth. "We're excited to partner on the transition, Mr. Langford," he said. "Danny is the future of the brand." "I am the brand," I said, and heard him smile through the line. "Legacy owners are a treasure," he said. "Have you thought about staying on as consultant?" "I've thought about a lot of things." He went quiet. "We will need an updated environmental report," he said, changing the subject. and a copy of your insurance declarations." "Sure," I said. "I'll send you the one that mentions the underground oil tank you folks missed." He cleared his throat. "Underground oil tank?" "Old mill," I said. "Buried it back in the day. It's on the map. Might still be a ghost." Silence long enough to be funny. "We'll need a Phase 1. "I always recommend those." He hung up with the eagerness of a man who wanted to call his boss. I hung up and called Blake, the environmental engineer who'd refused to bill me for a Phase Y when I loaned him my forklift after his famously caught fire. "You still got that tank report?" I asked. "Yep," he said cheerfully, "and you're going to love this. City won't sign off on any change of use until somebody pays for the Phase 2. The last guy balked at the $120,000 quote." "Of course it did," I said, and we both laughed like old men at a bar who had run out of reasons to cry. Danny's new website went live that Friday. "Langford Industrial is becoming Alpine Spiral," it said in pale gray text over a slick video of hands that were not my hands polishing steel that did not belong to him. He posted a glossy shot of my curved staircase in the Hastings atrium. He blurred out the placard with my name on it, but he didn't know I keep originals like sins. "Pretty," Ruby said, standing in my office doorway with 3 envelopes. "Bank sent a survey request, developer sent a letter of intent to buy your lot, and the next, and this," she tapped the third, "is certified from a lawyer with a tie whose name ends with 2 N's and an E. I opened the developer's LOI first. They thought they were being generous. They also thought I was tired. I initialed received and did nothing else. Then I opened the letter from the lawyer. It accused me of interference with contract for discouraging 2 of my vendors from transferring their accounts to Alpine. It threatened tortious something. It CC'd the bank. "Ruby," I said, "you got that chain of emails with Carson at Midstate Steel where he says he'll keep us on because we paid him when his wife was in chemo and he has a long memory." She smiled. "Printed and highlighted. Send it to the bank with a note. Vendor relationships are based on performance and trust. We intend to keep performing." The bank would read that and feel what I wanted them to feel, not risk, not rage, drag, the sense that everything with this deal would be a little bit harder than they'd planned. I let the next week pass with very little visible movement. I took the crew to lunch. I kept the machines humming. I watched Danny's Instagram fill with renderings and promises. I watched Lara's LinkedIn sprout buzzwords. I watched the developer send a second LOI with a slightly higher number and an expiration date bolded like a threat. I watched the bank request 3 more documents they didn't need. I watched the calendar. 30 days moves fast when you're in love and slow when you're in debt. On day 22, I went to see a man named Ed in a building that has no sign, but always smells faintly of cedar and money. He runs a community bank that acts like a private club. If he likes you, you get a pen and a line of credit. If he doesn't, you get a handshake and a list of people he claims can help. He liked me because I don't talk loud and I don't miss payments, and I sent his grandson a toolkit instead of a check when the boy said he wanted to be a welder. "What are you buying?" he asked without hello. "Time," I said, "and a floor plan." He grinned. "We can buy both." We did the dance that old men do when they respect each other. He looked at the land. He looked at the Phase 1. He looked at the credit union draft and said, "They'll do it, but they'll sit on committee. I'll commit now." "I don't need your money," I said, and let him see I was telling the truth. "I need your signature on a participation agreement with the big bank's commercial syndicate. I need to be the guy in the background who says no at the right time." He tapped his pen. "You're a cruel old bastard, Walt." "I'm polite," I said. "Cruelty is noisy." He agreed to take a slice of the big bank's exposure on my vendor's equipment lease portfolio, a dull, paper-heavy transaction that meant, by the rules of the game the big bank had invented, he got a chair when they talked about my block. I brought him pie the next day. Respect tastes like butter and sugar, if you do it right. On day 26, the notice arrived. Closing delayed pending environmental review. Danny came into my office with Laura, who had the posture of someone used to winning. "Did you do this?" she asked. "I told the truth," I said. "There's a tank. The city wants soil cores. The bank wants indemnity." Danny looked like a boy again. "You promised." "I promised to consider your offer," I said. "I am considering. I am also considering other things, like how you used my drawing of the Hastings staircase without credit and how you told my men I was obsolete while standing under a crane I paid off in a year when interest was higher than your voice." He opened his mouth, closed it. Lara jumped in. "You are sabotaging a legitimate business transaction, Mr. Langford." "We'll sue." "Maybe," I said. "And maybe the bank will read your projections and see you plan to double revenue while cutting warranty costs and laugh themselves into a stroke. Maybe the developer will read the easements and realize I can require them to switch to night shifts for all demolition in perpetuity. Maybe the city will notice that the only ingress easement for emergency vehicles across your new public promenade must be graded to accommodate 20-ton apparatus and therefore cannot be terraced with the artisanal steps your architect drew. Maybe." She stared at me. "People who win by momentum always look confused when they hit bedrock." "We'll be back," she said. "I'll be here," I said. On day 28, I called a meeting in the shop. Men leaned against sawhorses and drank coffee and tried not to look at me like I was the last tree in a clear cut. I told them the truth. The deal was delayed. The future was unknown. If they wanted to jump, I wouldn't hate them for it. "No," said Marcus, who'd smashed his thumb here the week his boy was born and stained the concrete with both bloods. "We go where the work is. You're the work." A murmur, heads nodding, fear, breathing, loyalty, exhaled. I dismissed them and went to my office and closed the door and let my hands shake for the first time in a month. On day 29, the big bank's council called January. "Your client's stubborn," he said. "Our borrower is ready." "You're blocking." Jan's voice is gentle until it isn't. "Your borrower is a child," she said, "and my client owes him nothing. He will, however, accept the following revised terms. Purchase price adjusted to reflect current appraisals. Separate consideration for IP. The land excluded, unless the buyer assumes environmental liability. Vendor contracts acknowledged as personal and not assignable. And your bank will escrow 12 months of debt service because your borrower's projections are insulting to math." Silence like a church. "We'll take it to committee," he said. "Take it to God," Jan said, and hung up. Night fell slow that day. I don't pray much, but I walked the shop in the dark, hand on machine housings I could identify by touch, and told the ghosts of the men who taught me that I would not let their lessons die on a kid's T-shirt. At 8:47 p.m., my phone rang. Education. They blinked, he said. They'll restructure. They want you to carry a note to make their numbers sing. I'll carry nothing, I said, but I'll lease. He laughed. Knew you would. Draft it, I said. And Ed? Put in the clause we talked about. The fuse? The fuse, he whistled. You are a polite, cruel old bastard. Put it in. I slept that night like a man who has buried his wife and his pride and found both still there in the morning, a little bent and a lot stubborn. Closing day was a week later in a conference room with glass walls and a view of a parking lot we all pretended was nicer than it was. Danny wore a suit jacket that didn't fit right. Lara wore a smile that did. The bank had 3 people in the room, all of them with pens that probably cost more than my first lathe. Jan sat beside me with a stack of documents bound by a red paper clip like a throat. Kyle from the bank did his opening speech. We're excited, he said. This is a generational transition. I looked at Danny. It is, I said. We signed. He bought the operating company, the accounts, the name he'd chosen, the aging receivables that I let him believe were clean. They were clean. I am not cruel. I am exact. He did not buy the land. He did not buy the IP. He licensed it for a sum that will pay for a small boat I will never board. He did not get my vendor pricing. He did get a lease, 5 years, market rate plus a sliver, with a long addendum written in plain English and iron. Lara read the lease once, and then again. This clause, she said, tapping page 6. What is operational covenant, continuity of craft? Jan answered because she likes to see smart mouths close. It requires the tenant to maintain the shop's core craft standards, metal thicknesses, weld certification standards, response times for warranty calls. If the tenant decides to go modern by outsourcing to lower grades, the landlord may terminate the lease. That's absurd, Lara said. It's heritage, Jan said. Lara flipped to page 9. And this? First offer on any debt? I leaned back. If your lender decides to sell your note, for example, because your financials make them itch, I get first offer to purchase it. That's just neighborly. Kyle made a noise. We would never... You sell paper every Tuesday, I said. No shame in it. Lara sighed. We're not planning to default. I'm not planning to buy your note, I said pleasantly. I like calendars too much. We closed. Hands were shaken. The bank took a photo for their internal newsletter where they pretend they finance dreams and not spreadsheets. Danny and Lara left in a rush to make a social post about visionary leadership. I stayed behind and watched Jan slide the executed documents into her leather folder like a farmer tucking away a deed. Fuse? She asked. Fuse, I said. The fuse was simple. It started with a day 1 clause in the lease that said rent was due on the 1st and late on the 3rd, and a fee on the 5th, and an option to declare insecurity on the 7th if certain covenants were breached. It contained a vendor assignment that looked like nothing. Tenant shall seek landlord's approval for any material change in vendor terms, and was everything when paired with the whispers I'd seeded in the right ears. It depended on reputation and on my other quiet purchase the week before. a 5% strip of the bank's floor plan for local construction credit, bought through Ed's bank and tucked into a participation agreement that would drop my name on the distribution list whenever Alpine's loan was discussed. There's nothing illegal about any of this. That's the thing no one tells you about the sharpest knives. They're legal. What they cut is time. The first month went fine. Danny came by the shop once with a camera crew to film a reel. The guys worked like they always did because work is work. He pointed at machines like he knew them. He signed 3 new jobs on terms that would have made my left eye twitch. He bought a new truck. In month 2, a vendor tried to extend him 30 days and backed out after a quiet lunch I had with the vendor's owner, where I mentioned that my daughter had knitted his grandson a blanket when he was in NICU. The vendor kept him on pro forma, cash before cut. Cash is oxygen. You can hold your breath for a while if you're young. You cannot talk while you do it. In month 3, a client wrote to say the new powder coat chipped after 2 weeks. Not my client anymore, his. But they CC'd me because I'd built their first staircase when their son was born, and the boy's handprint is under the second tread. "We can fix it," I wrote back. "I'll advise the tenant to honor your warranty." Danny responded from his iPhone in a message with no greeting and 2 misspellings. Warranty does not apply due to improper customer installation. The customer sent me a photo of the installation, as perfect as a hymn. I walked the job myself and ran my fingers over the powder and felt the wrong cure, the kind that happens when you run the line too fast because you told yourself modern meant cheap. I wrote to Danny, "Fix it." "On your dime." He wrote back, "Stay out of operations, Walter." "You're the landlord." I forwarded the thread to Jan with a subject line that said, "Continuity of craft." She sent Danny a notice to cure. He hired a lawyer. The lawyer mispronounced forge as forage on a call, and I sat on my hands so I wouldn't laugh old man ugly. Month 4 brought Lara's spreadsheet to the altar of reality. Interest rates did what interest rates do when you pretend they're a personality quirk, not a law. Payroll swelled because she'd hired a brand manager and a head of client experience instead of a shop foreman who could hear Bering speak. A developer paid them a deposit on some fancy railings for a rooftop bar, and then demanded the deposit back when the rooftop bar pivoted to more communal seating. Their cash cycle hiccuped. Rent was due on the 1st. On the 3rd, Ruby walked into my office with a white envelope and a look that said we had arrived. "No check," she said. On the 5th, she put a printed email on my desk. Alpine's apology for a delayed wire due to banking updates. On the 7th, Jan sent a notice of insecurity citing the missed rent, the uncured warranty issue, and a vendor term change implemented without required landlord approval. Lara called me within the hour. "You can't be serious," she said. "We're late 2 days." "You're in breach 3 ways," I said. "Cure them." "We'll overnight the rent." "Cure all 3. She went silent. You could hear a keyboard, fast in the background, the sound of someone hunting for leverage in a document that had none. "We'll fix the client," she said finally. "That clause is absurd." "Heritage," I said again, and hung up. They fixed the client with a grudging new powder coat 2 weeks later. The vendor terms were harder. You don't fix trust with an email. You fix it with 20 years. She sent me a spreadsheet showing they had successfully restructured supply chain to align with modern efficiency. I sent back a line highlighted in yellow. Landlord approval required prior to implementation. She wrote a reply so long it carried the unmistakable perfume of panic. Month 5 was a blur. A little rent, then a late rent, a bank email about cash reserves, a city clerk leaving a voicemail about that variance hearing. You might want to attend if you care about the sound of your neighborhood at night, I attended. The developer made a lovely presentation with slides that looked like hope and a rendering that featured a dog wearing a bandana. I stood when they called for public comment and said 28 words about night noise and shared drainage and the way sound travels like gossip down steel. The board tabled the variance. The developer emailed me an hour later asking brightly if I'd reconsider their LOI. I sent them a number they could not afford and a list of covenants they would never agree to if they had a pulse. Month 6, the bank blinked, not entirely. Banks don't blink like people. They blink like ships, slow, with a sound that can be mistaken for the ocean. Kyle called to ask for updated management accounts and to remind me how committed they are to the Alpine transition. I reminded him of the first offer clause on any assignment of debt. "We're not assigning," he said. "Of course not," I said. "But if you were, my fax machine works fine." He laughed. He did not sound amused. I told Jan to send a formal inquiry to the bank's special assets team, a polite note that said, "As landlord and first offer holder, we would appreciate notice of any change in lending relationship." It was a hand on the small of a back at a dance where everyone pretends to hate the song. The day after that letter landed, Ed called. "You want it?" he asked. "Want what?" "The paper. They're shopping a slice, not a default, a strategic repositioning." "They lose 2 deals and call it strategy," I said. "Price?" He named it. It was not charity, but it was cheaper than regret. "Take it," I said, "to your name." "You don't want them to see you?" "Not yet." He did the deal. The big bank sold a piece of Alpine's loan to the community bank that still smells like cedar. The effect was small on their balance sheet and enormous on my plan. Now, when Alpine's loan was discussed, Ed had a voice and my feet were on his footstool. Month 7, the powder line failed outright. Bearings scream in the language of men who have ignored small sounds. They tried to farm it out. The vendor they picked was a man I'd once spent a Saturday helping move because his wife's mother was the kind of cruel that makes your words taste like copper. He called me. "Should I?" he asked. "You should charge them in advance," I said, "and double your lead." He did. They paid. Cash left their account like water through a sieve. Rent arrived on the 9th. With a note asking for understanding, I sent a cure for chronic late payment and a reminder about the fuse. 3 late payments in any rolling 6 months constituted a default. "You wrote that?" Laura asked, incredulous, when she realized she'd seen it before but never felt it. "That's predatory." "No," I said, "that's arithmetic." Month 8 began with a sound from my youth, the click of a man counting coins in his pocket. Danny came by without Laura. He stood in the doorway of my office like a boy who'd broken a window and knew the whoop was coming. "We're catching up," he said. "We had a few hits." "You had a plan that required oxygen," I said. "Then you lit matches." He looked down. "You could help?" "I did," I said. For 11 years, I taught you that you don't comp hours to buy a smile, that you buy steel before you buy shirts, that you introduce yourself to a man by shaking his hand and looking him in the eye, not by sending him a PDF. His jaw clenched. Pride is a drug they never tell kids about. We're not you, he said. No, I said, you are not. He didn't ask, but he wanted to. I saw it cross his face like weather. If I asked for a deferment, he said finally, would you consider it? I would consider anything written down and honest, I said, and I would ask for collateral. He hesitated. We don't have much left. You have the truck, I said, and the boat you thought I didn't notice you bought, and the smile you give men you need. Pick two. He left without shaking my hand. Laura emailed me an hour later, threatening to sue if I exercised any predatory provisions. Jan replied with a list of provisions Laura had initialed. Some signatures taste like paper. Others taste like salt. Month 9 was winter. The shop breath fogged. The heaters rattled. The old men wore fingerless gloves because you cannot feel steel in mittens. I paid a bonus anyway. Ruby argued quietly and then louder, and then quiet again when I said, I'm paying for the last Christmas, not the next quarter. The following Tuesday, Ed called. They're missing covenants, he said. Which? Minimum cash, debt service coverage, twice. What do they want? A forbearance, he said. A nice one, with a bow. What do you want? I asked. I want my strip to be safe, he said, and I want to play backgammon with a man who can count. You're a romantic. I own a bank, he said. Same thing. We went to the meeting in the big bank's building with the atrium and the glass, and the way the heating system always makes the palms tremble like gossiping ladies. Kyle wasn't there. Higher men were. They used adjectives like strategic and nouns like pathway. Lara brought a PowerPoint. Danny brought his jaw. I brought silence. Jan brought paper. When we got to the part where they asked the landlord for flexibility, Jan slid our lease across the table open to the page with the fuse highlighted. We can waive nothing, she said, or we can accept rent on time and watch your borrower behave. The senior banker leaned back. You're being difficult. I spent 27 years earning the right, I said. Now I am exercising it. He shuffled through his notes. It would help if the vendor relationships were more stable. They will be, I said, and let him wonder whether that was threat or promise or calendar. They extended Alpine's covenants by 90 days with fees that would make a young man grind his teeth. They raised his escrow requirements. They demanded weekly cash reports. Lara lost her nail polish during the part where the banker said, personal guarantee. On the way out, in the parking garage that smells like wet brakes and cheap cologne, Danny said, you could have saved us. I am, I said. Ask me again in a year. What do you want? He asked, the exact same words men like him always say when the ground moves and they realize it is not the earth that loves them, it is balance sheets. I want you to respect the craft that paid your rent when you were 19, I said. I want you to stop marketing yourself into debt and remember that people order our work because their hands touched our steel and it held. I want you to visit Mr. Trevino and ask him how his knee is after he fell in 2009, And not because you want a line item from his kitchen remodel, but because he tells that story to his grandchildren, and my name is in it, and he has a right to say it without your logo on his sleeve." He stared. He will think about that for a decade. He will pretend he doesn't. Month 10, the developer came back a third time. This time they brought a man with soft hands and an accent from finance. "We can make you whole," he said. "Exit gracefully." I made him an offer that contained three things: an absurd number, a deed restriction that required any future use to keep One Bay functioning as a community shop with scholarships for kids who wanted to learn to weld, and a covenant that the night noise variance would never be sought again. He laughed in a tick like a watch. "We can't operate with those constraints," he said. "Then don't," I said. Month 11 is when the call came from Ed that made me sit down. "They're selling the rest," he said. "Your boy's heavy for them. They want to clean before year end. You want the note?" "Price?" He named it. It hurt. Revenge should. If it doesn't, it's just a party. "I want it," I said. "You sure?" "I'm old," I said. "I'm allowed to do one indulgent thing before I die." We structured it simple and lawful. His bank bought the note. I bought a participation in his bank's purchase. We agreed that if Alpine tripped the fuse, I would be the first call. It took 6 weeks for Alpine to trip it. Lara sent rent 2 hours late on the third late month and attached a PDF that said, "Please see attached narrative." The narrative was beautiful lies wrapped around true math. I let Jan send the default notice while I made coffee. There is an art to mercy and an art to precision. Mercy requires eyes. Precision requires a ruler. We did not evict them. That's not a story, that's just noise. We exercised the fuse. We issued a notice of landlord insecurity, then a demand to open books pursuant to the lease, then a proposal written in calm sentences. Landlord, that's me, buys tenant's equipment at a fair appraised value and leases it back at $1 per year. Tenant assigns all new contracts to landlord's designee for a period of 12 months. Tenant's bank consents to a forbearance contingent on tenant's acceptance of a trained operator appointed by landlord to restore continuity of craft. Tenant's brand continues, the work continues, the crew keeps their jobs, the rent is paid. Lara called it a hostile takeover. She is not wrong. She is also not right. Hostile is a tone. This was temperature. Danny came alone this time. He did not wear a suit jacket. He did not call me Walter. He stood in the doorway like a boy and said, "What do I have left?" "Your name," I said, "and the wife who told you you were a king when you were a squire. Decide what that name means before you staple it to another loan." We signed the work out the next morning. The bank preened. Ed played backgammon with me that afternoon with a beer that tasted like final chapters. We let Alpine breathe inside the ribs of the company I built, with a shop foreman installed by me who knows where the ghosts live and how to temper them. We kept clients. We kept the powder cure right. We answered warranty calls on the first ring. I did not ruin him. That is a child's fantasy. I did something quieter and harder. I made him carry the weight he thought was a crown. Spring came on like it always does, too fast at the trees and too slow for the men who need warm. The city approved the gazebo we donated steel for. The high school shop class cut first brackets that were perpendicular enough to make me proud and imperfect enough to make me useful. Mrs. Trevino's grandson came by and said he wanted to learn. I put a broom in his hand first because pride is a tool with a long handle. In June, Danny walked into my office and closed the door. He looked older. Men age in leaps, not lines. "We're current," he said. "Bank's off our neck for now. Clients are happy. Lara's thinking about a different job." I nodded. "There are things you must let a man say without you saying you knew them already." "I have a question," he said. "Why didn't you just take it all?" "You could have. I can see it now." I thought of Martha's hands, of the young men who brought their babies by the shop, of the way steel feels when it is wrong by a thousandth and right by a whisper. "Because I didn't raise thieves," I said, "and I didn't want my men to pay for your arrogance with their mortgages. And because the work deserves to deserve." He stood there long enough to make it count. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what I said, for how I left, for calling you obsolete." "Apology accepted," I said. "Rent due on the 1st. He smiled. "Rent due on the 1st. He left. I sat. The shop hummed the way a man hums when he forgives his son and still makes him pay back what he broke. I opened a drawer where I keep the first invoice I ever wrote, in pencil, to a man named Keller, who paid me in cash and pie because his wife said checks were for people who save. The graphite has smudged over the years into something that looks like a bruise and a blessing both. On a warm Saturday in late August, we delivered a staircase to the new library annex. We set it into the belly of the building with a crane that groaned like an old dog. The volunteer board members clapped like kids. The mayor made a speech that was harmless and too long. A boy asked if he could touch the steel. I said yes. You always say yes to that question. When everyone left, I ran my hand under the second tread and felt the place where the crew had stamped a date and 2 letters. WL. Not for the brand, for a man, for a set of hands that had signed 1,000 paychecks and 1 long fuse. I could have ruined him. I could have sold to the developer, smiled into a camera, and died in Florida with a sunburn and anger. Instead, I taught, I enforced, I held. They say revenge is cold. Maybe. Mine was room temperature and slow, served on a plate I own, in a building that will still be standing when the next young man decides that speed is the same as direction. Every 1st of the month a wire arrives. It is right on time these days. When it hits, Ruby prints the confirmation and drops it on my desk with a lollipop from the credit union and a smile that has both grief and joy folded into it like batter. I sign the confirmation and put it in a folder labeled Continuity. One night, much later, I sat in the dark office listening to the shop settle. Oil makes its own sounds in the quiet. The tick of contraction, the hush of cooling belts, the tiny applause of 100 little things doing exactly what they're supposed to do. I thought about Danny and Lara and the bank and the way the developer's emails had finally stopped. I thought about Martha, about the last thing she wrote down in a spiky hand when her pain was stronger than pride. Don't let them turn what you built into something noisy and cheap. Make them mind the craft. I mind it. With law and leases and letters sent at 8:01 a.m. on the 3rd day when a boy forgets what a calendar is for. With donuts for planning clerks and donations that aren't for my name. With hands that still know the difference between an edge that will cut truth and an edge that will fray it. I am not obsolete. I am the reason the lights turn on at 5:30, and the reason a kid in a bandana learns that metal sings if you treat it right. I am patient. I am precise. I am the man who can buy your debt without raising his voice. And I am, for my sins and my blessings, the master of a craft that makes staircases that hold, and men who do too.